Hi, Misha here, and quite a long time ago we looked at the first release from Eaglemoss in their Stargate collection, the Daedalus, the BC-304, the Deep Space Carrier, or Battle Cruiser. And then of course Eaglemoss went. They did do a couple of Goa'uld ships, the Pyramid and the Death Glider, in small numbers before they went out, but they never did this one. Just released from the company that pretty much bought their assets, their warehouse in the UK, Mastercraft. We have the F-302 Fighter Interceptor Space Superiority Fighter. So as always, we'll look at it, talk about the specs, at least as much as I can find them, and we're even going to compare it with some real-world aircraft, which is apropos for this because Stargate was supposed to be grounded in the real world, at least as we knew it in the 90s and early 2000s. Getting a little out of time now, but with all the rebootings going on, who knows? And who knows how many more will be in this series, how many more they were able to build before they went out of business, and if Mastercraft or someone else will make truly new ones, or if they're just going to sell off the existing Eaglemoss stock and that's it, because they're still coming in Eaglemoss boxes, but they're not coming with magazines. I have a feeling that that's why they were waiting to release them. They probably had the models, but we're waiting for the magazines to get printed. Believe it or not, that sometimes takes longer. More times than I could think of. With Eaglemoss, I would get the model and then the magazine would come weeks or even a month later. Either way, these are die-cast, and they're not scale models. They're just all kind of fit to size, and they're in the kind of 8 to 10 inch range. And obviously, because of the dimensions of the F-302, a lot of that length is actually width for the wings. And as just with the Daedalus, before these, I had no idea what these things look like. In some ways, this is kind of what I anticipated. In other ways, it is a bit of a shocker. Well, let's put it on the spinny thing. Real world talk for a minute. I did not see SG-1 when it first came out. We didn't have Showtime until 98 or 99. And I remember the first time I heard about it, a friend who was over, who was flipping through the channels, it must have been one of the earlier seasons, and he told me about it, and I'm like, okay. So they made a series off the movie, because I was really aware of the movie from 94. I actually had it on DVD. I didn't buy it, but when I bought a DVD player, they gave 5 free movies, and it was one of them. I'd actually already seen it before that, but I was happy to have it on DVD, and we did watch it more than once. Before that, of course, it was on VHS. And remember the first time I was told about it, I was told it was a sleeper film, and I would agree. Entertaining. But a very different tone from the show. And he was trying to explain to me, this is again back when we were flipping channels, that it was Stargate, but it wasn't all the people, different people, they didn't have all the rights. Pre-internet era, early internet era, things are interesting. Just saying that because I think one of the things they did for the movie and the early seasons of the show is they really didn't focus on ships, especially human ships, much, to kind of differentiate it from other sci-fi series. Not just Star Trek, but all of them. Ships were such a key thing. But I believe it was season 4, we first saw the X-301, the prototype that tried to kill its crew. But that's because it was pieced together through salvaged Goa'uld, take your pick, Death Glider parts. So that was a failure. But it did lead to the X-302, the immediate prototype here. The 301 was around the year 2000. The year 2002 would give us the X-302 prototype. And it was inspired by Goa'uld technology, plus some other alien stuff, but everything was built in house on Earth by the Tau'ri. Now the F-302, the production model, specifically the F-302A, would first appear a year later in 2003. The X-302 was much more successful in the fact that it did not kill its crew, or try to, but it was destroyed intentionally soon after being created, but it did lead to the F-302, and there are a few differences. As far as I know, this is supposed to be the F-302 model here. So, what are the specs, at least insofar as we can determine? Length, it's about 14.3 meters. But width, because of the wings, it's over 26.1 meters. It's also nearly 6 meters tall, again thanks to the wings and the dorsal stabilizers. So it's not a small ship. It has a crew of 2 and a pretty conventional looking canopy, front and back. In universe, it's pilot, co-pilot, or pilot, weapons officer, radar officer. But in the real world, for drama purposes, it's always good to have a ship that can at least carry 2 people on board. It gives dialogue with things. Single-seat fighters are kind of boring in shows. That's why most TV shows do show them with at least 2. And this was intended to be Earth's first interstellar spacecraft. So, fighter was still at first. The reason is the Goa'uld had used Naquadah, and the humans had run into Naquadria, and that allowed them to make a more advanced compact hyperdrive than previous had been available. That's why the Death Glider is not. Well, the hyperdrive didn't quite work out as planned. The X-302 had it, and they soon discovered that while it could successfully open a hyperspace window, or window into hyperspace, I should say, it would become unstable after a little bit of time there. So effectively, it would work, but if traveling more than a few kilometers, it would become unstable. So it ended up being more of a short hop, inter-system versus interstellar. In addition, we have several other engine systems. We have 2 main thrusters here, and those are supplemented by aerospike engines for high altitude performance. And then we have effectively a booster and afterburning system here as a central rocket engine. So we have a total of 4 engine systems, counting the hyperdrive, 3 without, and this because it was designed to operate in an atmosphere, fly into space, and fly back into an atmosphere repeatedly. So it could operate from a planet, which was all they had originally, because this did predate the cruisers, and they were hoping it could go long distances. Well, that didn't work out. That's actually what immediately led to the need for the X-303, the Prometheus, the BC-303, and then the BC-304 series, beginning with the Daedalus and the Odyssey. So yeah, quite a few engines to give it an interesting profile. It also had inertial dampeners because, well, actors don't like to be slammed around. Also because humans would be turned into jelly at the speeds that these were supposedly going, because interstellar distances are a lot. So yeah, inertial dampeners, and it had even artificial gravity, again because acting. So we'll go with that. And of course, it had a reinforced hull made with a Naquadah composite material. No shields initially. And we of course had weapons systems. In the front, you'll see 2 railguns, rapid firing, but those are the secondary weapons. The primary are underneath. Standard load were 4 AMRAAM missiles. These were AIM-120As, as seen in the show. A little strange that they used the A model. The C model was well into service by the time of the filming of Stargate. I'm not sure if that's just what they had for the production or what was modeled on the ship. Remember, you could justify it by saying that they were modified. While these would work perfectly well in atmosphere, a regular AIM-120 would not work in space, so we'll have to say they're modified. We do know that they had modified warheads for better penetration of shields and whatnot. They had naquita in the warheads to enhance the yield. And presumably their targeting systems were enhanced as well, because the F-302 had a detection range of up to 600 kilometers around itself. Even a longer comms range it could reach from the gas giants, Jupiter, Saturn, back to Earth or further. So we can just maybe say these are heavily modified AIM-120s that just look like A's. The fun thing is, since this is a real-world missile, we can actually kind of get an idea of the scale of this model, which we'll do when we kind of compare it to the real things. In the center here, we do have a small payload bay, cargo bay. Potentially it could carry weapons, but we do see it carrying a satellite, other things over time. It also has tow cables, harpoon type weapons, even though, I don't know, I guess I thought they might be going up against AT-ATs. And it has standard landing gear, but it was either V-stall or true stall capable. It didn't really need much of a runway at all. It could take off and land in very little distance. Maximum speed we've seen on screen in atmosphere is at least Mach 6. And we see it flying at about 30 kilometers up, high atmosphere, but of course it can go into space, so it effectively has no maximum altitude. Later General O'Neill said it flew like an F-22 Raptor and rode like a Boeing 747, meaning just smooth, slightly boring. Things that pilots would not necessarily like. It had computer-assisted targeting, computer-assisted sensors. It had an advanced autopilot, of course, off-bore axis targeting for the weapons. Pretty standard things, because it was meant to blend alien tech with human tech. Well, since it wasn't really going to work out as an interstellar craft, fortunately, the design was made from the get-go to be easily disassembled and reassembled with little technology on the other side of the Stargate. That's why you have the big wings. They come apart and the center part can go through. When they went to the full production model, F-302, they modified the hyperdrive so it could only do the short hops by design. They also modified the main engines and the aerospike subordinate engines to work better in upper atmosphere, just making the transition from atmosphere to space more effective, because they realized they'd have to ship these over to, say, the Alpha side or whatnot. But of course that also led to the development of the cruisers. So even though we mentioned them in the past, let's quickly revisit the 304. It's been a while. The F-302 was successful in being Earth's first space-worthy fighter, but since it was unsuccessful at being an interstellar craft, the need for some type of carrier large cruiser came about, and thus we rather quickly got the X-303, later named the Prometheus. And it was meant to be mass-produced, but since it was based on Goa'uld technology, and since more and more cooperation was happening with the Asgard, the Greys, it would actually lead to the X-304, later the BC-304 Daedalus. So there was just the one member in which it was put into service. By 2003-04, it would be the BC-303. And the BC-304 is just an enlarged, improved version here. The Daedalus is around 200 to 220 meters long and 90 to 95 meters wide. Had a standard crew of roughly 200, maximum crew of 250, minimum crew of about half a dozen, including at least 3 on the bridge. Built with a lot of the same tech initially as the 302. We had railguns. The 304 had 32 of them. The previous 303 had 24. It had 16 vertical launch missile silos. The Prometheus had 12. Standard was cruise missile, but they did carry and operate with Mark III, Mark 8, and Mark 9 nuclear warhead weapons. In fact, the Mark 9 could even be retrofitted to the F-302, but it wasn't, strictly speaking, that easy. We had, of course, a hyperdrive inspired by an Asgard system. We had sublight engines capable of about 1/4 to half light speed. And we had landing thrusters, maneuvering thrusters for atmospheric operations because they could land. We had the same kind of Naquita reinforced hull. We would get Asgard shielding, and eventually 4 Asgard beam weapons too. But these would be installed later on the ships. The original Prometheus could carry up to 8 F-302s, but the squadron on board, Blue Squad, operated with 6 as standard, so a little extra capacity there, but 6 was norm. When it came time for the 304, we have 2 complete bays, so it could carry up to 16. Notice how, wide and long these are for the wings. Actually, shape matches pretty well. Where I put that? Over here, sorry. But typically, we would have 2 squads of 4 fighters, so 8. Still more than the Prometheus, and we have 2 as opposed to 1 squads operating, although they're slightly lower. And the typical reason was to have extra room for other ships to dock, or just, more cargo room. But it could carry up to 16 if needed. And they would just launch under cover from these bays, which should have force fields. And they would build at least 6 of the BC-304 deep space cruisers, and they were meant for longer duration missions because it took about 3 weeks to get between galaxies. Other missions would be much longer, so they knew they had to build it with amenities like a gym because we're in space and other stuff like that. So at least in universe, it explains why it has decent accommodations, decent quarters going on. This isn't a short duration thing. But yeah, this model from Eaglemoss is quite nice. It's thin by its nature, but quite long, and majority is metal. And since the 302 bays are a very prominent part, it's nice to have some 302s to really look at. As far as my impression of the fighter itself, the wings are interesting. I'd almost want them to be swept the other way. But to be fair, in the real world, we've had various experimental airplanes with vertically forward swept wings, so it's not unheard of. The cockpit, on the other hand, is pretty old school. Now, I have to imagine they did it like that for, filming reasons. It's easier for the production. But it does remind me more of a World War II style canopy, or a helicopter style, than a jet. And again, we've already talked about the AIM-120As. It's a little interesting that it effectively has an outdated version of the missile on board, but we can make room for that. Anywho, let's compare it with some real-world fighters. And we have to begin with it, because even O'Neill made the comparison, the FA-22 Raptor. This is really the first 5th generation jet to go into service, and probably in terms of a true air superiority fighter, the most advanced thing America has fielded and maybe ever will field, because times are changing. Who knows? This first flew, the prototype at least, in 1997, but because of the costs and changing needs, it actually was not put into service until 2005. So it technically predates the X301, X302, although actually they technically went into service before it. So, like I said, in universe this is about 14 by 26 meters. The FA-22 is just under 19 meters long, with a wingspan of just over 13.5 meters. As I said, we know these can at least do Mach 6 in an atmosphere. The 22 is actually one of the faster fighters out there today. It can do Mach 2.25. In the past, during the Cold War, both Russia and America had faster aircraft, at least fighters. But it was really discovered that past Mach 2, it becomes pretty useless, frankly. So, yeah. Again, the F-302 is capable of going into space, so it has no maximum altitude. The Raptor has a max altitude of 20,000 meters, so pretty high, frankly. As for defense, it has a 20mm cannon for close range, and it carries 2 AIM-9 Sidewinders for short range, more or less self-defense, and 4 to 6 AMRAAMs, AIM-120s, for medium to longer ranges. And all of its weapons are carried on internal bays, although it does have hard points on the wings either for fuel tanks or external weapons. And even though it was designed as a fighter, the F-22, to kind of make it fit the needs of the Air Force, who's the only operator, probably ever will be, it was turned into the FA-22, given some ground attack abilities, for example, JDAM missiles and stuff. Anyway, stealth was very important here, so that's when we have the internal bays and kind of the angles and everything to it. Obviously, it was not important stealth for the F-302, hence the external weapons carriage. Sticky Addy bits, yeah, this isn't going to give much in the way of stealth. But this does very well. And notice the cockpit definitely looks more of a modern design, and that's kind of what I was saying, as do the engine exhausts. The cans in the back are of a different style. They built fewer than 200 of these, though, including prototypes and test models, and production data a long time ago, although service is still there. Again, this is about as advanced as a true fighter gets. But next, let's look at something a little more multi-role. Well, the F-302 is operated by the U.S. Air Force, as well as the Russian VKS and the Chinese PLAAF. But since it does operate from a carrier, it makes a lot of sense to compare it with the U.S. Navy's and others' Hornet. Specifically, I picked a Super Hornet, specifically the F variant, because it's a 2-seater, just like the F-302. So yeah, this is the FA-18F Super Hornet. Pretty much the most modern version. In fact, I even picked the advanced Super Hornet from Hobby Master here. Of course, my models are all in 1/72 scale, and since this does have an AIM-120C on the wing, it really gives us a comparison. This is a scale version. It's a little bit longer than the one on the Eaglemoss, so kind of gives us a scale idea of maybe 185 or 190 for the Eaglemoss. Yeah. And again, this is a carrier-based plane, so it does have folding wing tips. It's about 18.3 meters long. But just like the F-22, it has a wingspan of about 13.5, depending on wingtip missiles or not. This is a much more conservative design, fourth generation, but very effective. In fact, there was a time when the U.S. Navy only operated Hornets. See, this was a concept that Boeing put forward as an interim solution until the next fighters were available. It appeared in 2000 and was approved for Navy service quite quickly because it was based on tried and true technology. So by 2001, 2002, these started to go into the fleet. And actually by 2006, they were doing an all Hornet fleet, be they the older FA-18s or the new Super Hornets. The E variant's a single-seater, like the C before it. The D's and F's are twin seats. Typically, these would be expected to have a ground attack, but they could also be air superiority. They could carry about 8,000 kg in payload. Pretty versatile, carrying pretty much anything, long range. Now they are slower for fuel efficiency reasons, about Mach 1.8. And because it is a naval aircraft, it has a slightly lower ceiling of about 15,000 meters. So, yeah. But it's also a lot cheaper. And with the Super Hornets, especially this advanced model here, they did try to make it not stealth, but stealthier, including the engines. This one has conformable fuel tanks, and it even has this unique pod that can hold up to 4 AIM 120s in it. So if you don't want to put anything on the wings, strip it down for low visibility, you can do that. I've always liked the Hornet and Super Hornet. I think it looks neat, but it is much more conventional than the F-22, but also much cheaper. But it's a bit of a jack of all trades, master of none. But then again, so is the F-302, being Earth's only starfighter. It's called upon to intercept other fighters, destroy capital ships, bomb, even cargo runs sometimes, or patrol runs. So it fits. I wonder if these could hold more than 4 missiles under the wings. There's certainly real estate for it. The wings in this model are metal. In fact, it's pretty much all metal. Anywho, we've looked at the canopy, so now let's compare it. So yeah, looking here at the canopy, real quick, let's compare it to something from the 80s and today, the AH64 Apache. Very similar canopy system, kind of gives us a general idea of scaling. I debated if I was going to bring out a helicopter or a Harrier for V-style, but this seemed more fitting because of that. The Apache is not small. It's about 17.7 meters long, and with the rotors going, it's over 14.5 meters wide. Of course, the body is much more narrow. It has a cannon. Up to this point, the 22 and the 18 had a 20 millimeter. Well, this ups it considerably to a 30 because it's more of a tank buster ground attack, and it has stub wings that have originally a total of 4, later 6 attachment points for weapons. Usually though air to surface, although sometimes you'll see air to air for self-defense. Crew of 2. And because it is a helicopter, it's not even able to hit 300 kilometers, and that's actually a fast helicopter, and cruise at about 200. And its maximum altitude is about 6,400 meters. So considerably lower than any jet, but that's a capable helicopter, it really is. But there are a few elements from this, again, especially with the cockpit and the ability to take off vertically, that are shared with the F-302. And I did want to compare the cockpits. I should also point out that the U.S. Army is the main operator of the Apache because of the division of roles between the Air Force and the Army in America today. So, we have one more to talk about, a fighter that didn't even exist when the F-302 was on screen. The prototype here came out in 2002, and the first production model in 2003. And of course we come to the F-35, the famous or infamous aircraft. The first prototype, and I use that kind of loosely because it was pretty different, flew in 2000. But the first even semi-pre-production model didn't start operating until 2006, and even then, a lot of your variants like the B, which was the one capable of VSTOL, and the C, the carrier-based version here with larger folding wings, weren't until much, much later. These are supposed to be in service many years before they actually were, especially the Bs and the Cs. C's just because it was a bit of the minor one in the batch, but the B took a while to get going because it was really the first supersonic capable VSTOL aircraft. The Harrier, while a good aircraft for its day and time, was solidly subsonic. But the idea is this is to kind of replace everything, Air Force, Navy, Marines. And after a long and expensive production, it might. There's a lot of debate, but it seems to be finally getting off the ground. And unlike the F-22, which was for America only, this was designed for export from the very beginning. Depending on the version, the specs are a little different, but you're looking at about 15.5 meters long, 10.5 meters wide. And this actually has only one engine, although it is really the most powerful engine stuck into a jet fighter. It's capable of Mach 1.6, so it's slower than the previous ones, but it's sufficient for its needs. It can also carry quite a large payload. Like the F-22, it has an internal bay, and it has external hardpoints as well. Pretty good weapons carriage ability. It varies between the model and the configuration. And this has a 25mm cannon as opposed to 20. Although some variants have to mount it in an external pod, some variants have it internal. Single seat. And it is built with stealth in mind, but not to the extent of the F-22. It basically takes that technology and scales it back a bit. But this would have been kind of the real world equivalent of a cutting edge fighter with the F-302. So I wanted to bring it out, show you. Especially the angles, the lines. Again, 1/72 scale from Hobby Master like the rest. Oh, and by the way, it has a maximum altitude, for what it's worth, of about 15,000 meters, like the Super Hornet. Anyway, let's wrap this up with the F-302. In universe, after the obtaining of the Asgard technology around 2009, The original F-302A is replaced in production and eventually serviced by the F-302B. The B removes the, frankly, of limited use hyperdrive system because it took up a lot of space and replaces it with a miniaturized shield generator. Before that, they did not have shields. The cruisers did, but not the fighters. And that was kind of the new standard unless the hyperdrive was needed. There was also the QF-302C, which was an unmanned drone. In the real Air Force, there are plenty of QF aircraft. It was used for testing autopilot and, of course, targeting systems, that kind of thing. They didn't make a ton of those, but it was a version. And then that would lead into the F-302D, which was the next generation space superiority version, and it finally got folding wings. I don't know why it took them so long. These wings screamed to be folded. It also finally replaced the AIM-120s with the more advanced, more modern missile systems, presumably upgraded with the NACWDA or something else too. And then finally, the F-302E restored the hyperdrive ability for when it was needed. And I don't know if it somehow managed to cram both it and the shields in, or if the shields had to go away again. And that's the most up-to-date version in universe. So what do I think? First off, I think Hobby Master did a good job with this. It's all metal, except for the detail parts. And it's a good size. Any bigger would have been a bit absurd. As far as the design itself, I mostly like it. Frankly, maybe a little bit more modern engines would look good on it. These are very 1990s, but then again, keep in mind when this was put on the show. So it's a product of its time, and it shows. The only thing I really don't care for is the canopy. That very squared framed canopy. It just doesn't fit. This isn't meant to be a ground attack. This isn't meant to be a helicopter. So it just kind of comes across as pretty archaic. I think if they had done a square one but made it without the frame, it would at least given it an interesting futuristic look. But framing it like that just makes it look like a World War II thing. That's my only really complaint against the design, not the model, but the design, is I think I would have gone with a more nuanced looking canopy. I actually think something inspired by the F-117 would be neat. The so-called stealth fighter. It's a very sharp, angular canopy, not bubbly, because I get what they don't want to go with just a standard canopy. It'd be kind of boring, like an F-16. So do something different, but there's other options besides kind of this retro look. It works for the Battlestar Galactica Viper Mark II, because that in universe is supposed to be an older Viper. But if you look at the newer Vipers, like the Mark VII, they have more of an F-16 looking dome there. So take it as you will. I do actually like the little vertical stabilizers. They're pretty neat. I was talking with one of the guys that helps me, and we agreed that old ships, take it or leave it. But we both said Asgard at the same time. So if there's an Asgard coming, that would be neat if they ever get around to doing that. I'd also really like to see a Prometheus. That would also be nice. Again, I don't know how far Eaglemoss got into the series. And I don't know if Mastercraft, once they exhaust their current inventory, if they're going to work with the factories over in Asia to make all new ones. Or at least start up production of the existing ones, or not. I have no idea. Maybe they don't even know. But this one popped up, and yeah, couldn't resist. Clips onto the stand well. Not too tight, not too loose. All standard. No magazine ship with it, but it does ship in the foam lined box as usual. So, wanted to show it to you, but also wanted to compare it to real world technology. I don't know. Have some fun with it. Make it worthwhile. So yeah, let me know what you think of the ship, the model, and its comparison to real fighters of today. Appreciate you hanging out. If you could, please like, share, and subscribe. And I do have a Patreon if it matters. Check it out. This is Misha. Catch you very soon. Next time.